but I believe there are some more that has not been properly documented. There are so many words killing attached to their kings.
The reason why manuscripts are so important is that there's still millions of manuscripts in the world that have not been digested and collected.
Selamat pagi, good morning. Boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia? Nanti biar Jaks yang terjemahin. Saya Diah, saya dari Depok. Ya. Ini saya tertarik, saya pertama baca ini bukunya Dr. Nia ini di Gerak Budaya waktu itu di live tayang ketika launching di situ. Jadi sekarang saya datang ke sini. Pertama judulnya juga sangat menarik. Terus ini sehubungan sama pertanyaan saya. Ketika perubahan ya dari Indian Ocean Global Order ke Colonial Order itu juga terjadi di sini. Dr. Nia juga udah sebutin ya, sebetulnya dari Cosmopolitan Universal Trade Network ke Monopolized Colonial Trade. Tapi saya pingin mungkin yang sifatnya ke kesadaran geografis gitu. Jadi dari yang asalnya kita sangat judulnya aja udah Ocean Remember tapi kita forget Ocean gitu kan ya. Ocean remember us tapi kita yang lupa sama Ocean gitu. Kita lupa bahwa kita archipel gitu. Nah, jadi kesadaran geografis yang berubah saat itu gitu ya. Dari kita yang sangat terbuka archipel, kalau Pram bilangnya arus dari selatan ke utara gitu ya. Kemudian dia berbalik gitu menjadi kita yang insular dan unsullied. Kesadaran geografisnya insular, kesadaran kemanusiaan kita unsullied. Kita jadi purity tapi through dehumanization. Itulah natif gitu. Yang di mungkin Profesor Faris akan bisa lebih banyak ngomong soal itu gitu. Itu jadi saya ingin tahu sehingga kayak bulan Desember kemarin kita lihat kehancuran Sumatera itu sebetulnya ketika ini udah tidak kuat lagi menampung gitu. Global order kolonial yang start berapa ratus tahun yang lalu itu masih kita continue sampai sekarang dan itu sekarang udah exhaustive gitu. Ada satu buku yang sangat menarik dari pasangan suami istri Patnaiks. Ya, itu ada konsep yang saya pikir sangat menarik kalau diintegrasikan ke penulisan sejarah kita di Nusantara gitu. Kalau saya ngomong Nusantara itu bukan cuma Indonesia tapi Malaysia, Filipina, negeri di bawah angin gitu ya, itu Nusantara gitu. Jadi mereka berdua ada elaborasi satu konsep yang sangat menarik, exogenous stimuli. Jadi salah satunya adalah alam gitu. Jadi bagaimana alam kemudian udah exhaustive karena kita ignore, karena kita betul-betul kesadaran geografis kita udah berubah, kita udah ignore mereka gitu. Itu sih, itu satu. Terus kedua, apakah di situ ada sumber dewa yang menyebutkan soal batara iklim? Batara iklim. Ya, yang saya kebetulan tesis saya penelitian soal sejarah Nusantara menurut salah satu kelompok kejawen gitu. Jadi mereka mempercayai bahwa dulu salah satu raja Jawa yang tertua itu batara iklim dan kulitnya hitam gitu. Ya, makasih.
Namanya siapa, Ma? Dia, Ibu Dia, okay. So I think about this geographical consciousness, maybe Farish gonna be able to elaborate more on that. Yeah, what I know is a little bit that the fact that there was the mental map that we have currently is so much different than what has been built before. Before we don't see borders as what separate us. There was no such things. That kind of land barrier is basically gonna define the people who live in that within that areas. So there was a kind of fluidity. Yeah, it was not inward-looking type of the people. It was outward-looking. There's the kind of fluidity, and especially when it's related to the people between the islands. Yeah, they could name. They will not call it like, for instance, like now, Sumatra Sumatra meaning that everybody's that living in that island. Yeah, they will not call, oh, I come from Sumatra. No, but they would identify themselves with either with their family names or with the place where they were born. Let's say, for instance, there are many cases of names where we can find that they use their geographical. Let's say, for instance, Abdul Rauf Al Singkili, for instance. Al Singkili is a name of a place somewhere in south part of Aceh, Al Singkili. Or, for instance, if the people from Sumatra, from Aceh, going to Mecca and Medina, and then they start to put the geographical names behind their names, and that becomes like, for instance, Al-Ashi, something like that, to inform the people, the outsiders, the people at international arenas that they come from that region, something like this. So yeah, so the ideas of the geography is so much different. Yeah, you don't call it, oh, I am Indonesian, for instance. You don't, people did not know, because the invention of that name itself just come in the 20th century, and that is by the contribution of the colonial powers too. Like to name previously the Dutch called these areas the Dutch East Indies, right? The eastern side of India, something like that. And then somehow, in the 20th century, before the 1945, people start to call it, there's a kind of discussion and internal discussion within the governmental level that was going to succeed the colonial powers, that we can name these regions as Indonesia, and also Malaysia, for instance. Malaysia, the same case. All these kind of names just came with in the 20th centuries. In the past, people don't call us, I am Malay. They don't even identify them that way about themselves. Oh, I am Chinese, I am Indians. They did not, but they know by their names. Your names. If you're a criminal, then you will be known by your names, not by your race. If you do something, if you involve, if you're a refugee, if you seek, if you are a victim of a war, for instance, they will not call you, they will not attach that kind of race to you, but your names, these kind of things. So this kind of idea, the foreigners, for instance, it just come. Foreigners, inlanders, the citizen, for instance, it's a product of 20th century. And especially I remember United Nations has just, established the map, calling this area Southeast Asia in 1975. This is United Nations, and it's legitimate. They legitimate the name of Southeast Asia to confine, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. All this, and they call it Southeast Asia just in 1975. Before that, there's no such category of regions, and also it goes with the continental, etc. So I think for further explanation, I'll give to him. And then the second one, Batara Keling, it could be. I have used several sources. Let's say, for instance, Serat Kanda, Babat. You will see the books and refer to it. But as far as I remember, I have not encountered, Batara Keling, Ikling, Batara Ikling, yeah. But I believe, it's your next job probably to to continue finding it. Of course, you come up with this question because you have found this somewhere, right? Like there is that kind of words about Batara Ikling somewhere written, and your next thing is just to trace, to trace where is the primary sources that author, So yeah, I have, even me, so many things I write here, just compile everything. Yeah, so you see Rama Keling, yes, yeah. So I mean, you better have a look at the books, but I don't remember I have included more information about Batara Ikling. Yeah.
The point about history, I think, history, the way it's been done, is being done today, and the way it's been done for the last few decades, I think has gone a long way, yeah? Not the way that we were taught history at school, which is very boring, just names, dates. I think today we are thankful for the fact that of all the disciplines in the humanities, history is perhaps the one that's been most influenced by other disciplines and other methodologies. So you have material history, you have even music history, art history, history of words, yeah? So like Nia said, you can find historical resources everywhere. The very words you use are all historical. Every word you use has a history to it, right? So if you learn to look at this history of migration, I'll give you an example. You take the word farang, yeah? In Persian means a Westerner. From Persian, farang, farangi, goes all the way to South Asia, Feringgi, comes all the way to Southeast Asia. In Penang, there's Batu Feringgi. Go to Thailand, it's farang. So what does it mean? It basically means a white Western European. But the roots of it go back to the history of the Crusades, because the etymological root of the word is Franks. It's the Franks of Europe who were fighting the Arabs. So from Europe all the way to Southeast Asia, this word travels and it changes meaning over time. It has different connotations depending on context, a bit like the word Keling again, yeah, it travels. So the very words themselves carry history. And so you don't have to go very far. Look at your vocabularies and look at how, I think this is also important for us, because I want to go back to scholarship from the South, yeah. There is a tendency, I think, for many academics in the South to look at how the non-Southern world impacted on the South. But we don't spend enough time looking at how the South or the East impacted on the North and the West. Yep. So it's also interesting when you start reading. I mean, one of my backgrounds is English literature. And when you actually read English literature, you start finding elements of Southeast Asia and South Asia and Africa popping up in English literature, whether it's high literature or popular literature. You read the stories of Sherlock Holmes, right? And then there's a famous story. One of the Sherlock Holmes stories, Sherlock Holmes and the Rat from Sumatra, right? And so you start having these elements woven into, you read your Jane Austen's novels, connect the history of England with the history of the Caribbean. If you read it through the lens of history. And so we look at our part of the world. We always talk about how the West sees Southeast Asia. But Southeast Asia also entered the vocabulary and the common imaginary of Europeans. If you know the English playwright, yep, Henry Fielding, novelist and playwright, he has a play written in 1730, and he uses the phrase, the King of Bunton. The King of Bunton. The King of Bunton in England in the early 18th century was a term used to describe someone who was super rich. Yeah, sort of Elon Musk of England at the time. So if you were like super rich in England, they say, wow, he's the King of Bunton. Why? Because the reputation of Bunton, which is here, yeah, in the next, just to the west of Jakarta, Bunton was then, from the late 16th, 17th and early 18th century, one of the richest ports of Asia, right? So the legend of Bunton traveled all the way to Europe. So if you were super rich at the time, people say, wow, he's the King of Bunton. Look at the King of Bunton. It means you're that rich because of the reputation of Bunton. So this is where it becomes interesting. So what Nia does in this book is you connect the dots. Yeah, you connect these movements and how when people travel, people bring ideas, vocabularies, beliefs, ideologies, geographies with them. And so these things mix and match. Can I go back to the question earlier about geography? Yeah, and I think I agree. Saya rasa kan kalau kita lihat salah satu dampaknya kolonialisme di rantau kita adalah kita telah dikotakkan. Ya, dan apalagi dalam kasus sejarah Jawa, dalam tulisannya Stanford Raffles, bukunya The History of Java. Saya nggak tahu kenapa di Indonesia fan club untuk Raffles ini begitu besar ya. Ramai orang yang sangat senang sayang pada Raffles. Saya benci pada ini. Ya, ini kayak kolonialis banget ya. Tapi yang menarik tentang buku The History of Java itu adalah ya dalam buku itu ada peta Jawa. Yang menarik kalau kita bandingkan peta Jawa Raffles itu dengan peta-peta Asia Tenggara pada waktu itu, kan peta-peta lain menggambarkan Nusantara, ya, wilayah kelautan Asia Tenggara. Tapi dalam bukunya History of Java itu peta Jawa itu hanya Jawa. Jadi Pulau Jawa dipulaukan lagi, ya. Dan tulisan Raffles itu memberikan gambaran bahwa masyarakat Jawa dan budaya Jawa dan tamadun Jawa itu wujud hanya dari Jawa. Seakan tidak ada kontak langsung antara Jawa dan seluruh rantau Asia Tenggara dan Asia. Nah, ini bahaya, ya. Jadi kita dikotakkan. This is the power of maps. Maps are very powerful tools. The map of Java that Raffles produced in 1817 presents a Java that is entirely disconnected from Southeast Asia, which is historically not true. And Raffles is not stupid. He knows that. Yeah. So he does it deliberately. It is a deliberate attempt to box Java. And that's what's happened to us. You know, we are boxed into these categories. You're Sumatran, you're Javanese, you're Filipino, and I think, you know, on the one hand, today we talk about globalization. We are all supposed to be, all of us, especially the younger generation, global citizens and all that. But we remain mentally, you know, trapped in our tiny, narrow epistemic categories. And I think this is actually very dangerous. So one of the things we need to do, like you said, we need a faculty of history. We should have a faculty of geography as well. Because the geography of the post-colonial South is a colonial geography. The entire map of Southeast Asia is a colonial map. The entire map of Africa is a colonial map. Read Basil Davidson's book, yeah, The Black Man's Burden, Africa and the Curse of the Nation State. Africa, as we know it today, was constructed through colonization. All the lines you see on the map, these are not lines drawn by Africans. Who drew the map of Southeast Asia? Not us. Yeah, the lines, the borders of Southeast Asia were drawn in London and Paris and Den Haag and Madrid, not us. So now, it doesn't mean like tomorrow suddenly we throw away our passports and we just walk, you know, wherever we can. We can't do that. We know that. But we can reconceptualize this. And I think this is what Nia's book is doing. Yeah, what this book is doing is making you think, look, there was another time in the past, not too long ago, when in Asia, in the widest sense of the word, there was another kind of globalization that did not come with the language of nationalism or hostility towards foreigners. And this is the interesting thing, you didn't mention this, but the Kalings are not foreign. They are not foreign, yeah? Like, we are not foreigners to one another. Historically, in the past, the foreigner is a relatively late concept that comes into our languages because historically we are all mixed, right? So, and for me, this is more dangerous than calling Indians inferior. Calling them foreigners makes it even more problematic, you know, because remember, while this is happening, the same was happening to Arabs, Persians, Chinese, Armenians, Eurasians, who are all then being labeled as foreigners. So the categories you talk about, you know, Inlander, Auslander, and all these things are part of the vocabulary that we have today. So hopefully, you know, more books like this will actually, you know, we cannot undo the past, we know that, but at least make us question the past. And if you question the past, you question your present reality as well. And I think that's why it's important. So yeah, that's about it.